Hi, welcome to Automation Mentor. This session is about an introduction to test automation. So we'll discuss about what is test automation and why test automation is important and when to go for automation for your project. And we'll also discuss about the advantages of test automation, and we'll also highlight some of the tools available in automation, both open source and licensed tools. And we'll also briefly discuss about the automation framework and what is automation framework and what are different types of frameworks available. So what is test automation? Automation is nothing but simulating your manual test cases or your manual steps and manual actions that we perform as part of your application testing using different automation tools. So we might use automation tools or sometimes we might use programming languages to simulate our actions that we perform on the application. So we simulate these steps step by step. Let's say if we have a documented test case with 5 steps, and we simulate all these 5 steps using a programming language or a tool, and we verify using the programming or tool whether the test case is passed by validating the expected result. Most of the automation tools provide an option to verify whether the expected result is displayed or not. And if it is a backend application, you can directly write some script to validate whether the data is properly inserted into database or a file has been created in case of batch process or file manipulations. So we use the software to set up test preconditions, and we control the execution steps that we perform as part of our test execution, and we compare the actual results with the expected results, and we generate a report at the end of the execution. So why automation is important, and when do we go for test automation? So the primary advantage or the primary goal of the test automation is to save time. So if something takes 1,000 hours to execute manually, we automate that to reduce the time. So unless we save time, it does not really make sense to go for automation. So when we start automation, or even before we start automation, we usually start with calculating the ROI and how much time we actually spend if we don't have automation, and how much time it takes to automate the product, and whether it really saves any time for us. If something takes 100 hours to execute manually, and if it takes 1,000 hours to automate, and you do only 2 iterations per year, that means you spend 200 manual hours per year, but you spend 1,000 hours for automation. That means it takes at least 5 years to get the return on the investment, which is not an ideal case for automation. So usually prefer the projects or the applications which have the less than 1 year ROI for automation. So that means if you are spending 200 hours per year for manual testing, and if it takes less than 200 hours to automate that, including the maintenance effort, that means it's a good candidate for automation. So there could be some cases where we still go for automation even if we don't save time, especially if the project is having very aggressive timelines and we want to reduce the overall turnaround time on the testing. If your testing one cycle takes, let's say, 100 hours, and if you have 2 engineers working on that, and that means it takes 2.5 weeks to complete one iteration. And if you want to reduce that cycle to 2 days, for example, or even in some cases 1 day, to aggressively market the product, then we still might want to go for automation even if you don't save time in this case. Here are a few reasons why we want to go for automation and when to start automation. So frequent regression testing. So if you have, let's say, monthly production deployment plan where you have to execute at least 2 iterations of your regression testing, that means you run more than 20 iterations per year. That is a very huge number. And if you don't have automation, that means you're going to spend tons of manual effort to complete your regression testing. And I think automation is the best way to handle the situation here. And we reduce the human effort. So as we discussed, definitely we look forward to save time wherever possible. So automation is the best way to save time. Reliability of test output. So when a manual engineer performs the same activity again and again, there might be a chance of human error. So and in case of automation, the results are always reliable because there's no chance of overlooking something by machine. And if automation is done properly, and if the script says something is failed, that means there's more probability that it's failed, and we can actually write some additional functions to recheck if something is failed, double check the same test again and again to ensure it's really failed or not. And rapid feedback to developers. So it manually takes 200 hours, which is with 2 resources, 100 team hours, and that means 2.5 weeks. So product owners cannot wait for 2.5 weeks to complete our testing to ship the product. So everybody wants to complete the whole development and testing as quickly as possible in agile environment. So it's not practical to take 2.5 weeks for a testing cycle just for the regression testing. So virtually unlimited iterations of test case execution. This is the beauty of automation. So you can do any number of iterations of your regression tests or functional tests. Let's say if you have 100 test cases automated and it takes less than 5 hours to execute through automation. Literally you can do one iteration every day. I mean, if the application environment is very dynamic, doing one iteration of regression every day without automation is nearly impossible unless you have large number of teams dedicated for that. So if you have automation, you can do any number of iterations to ensure the product is not impacted by any changes done on day-to-day basis. So wherever you have repeated test case execution required for the product, you can go for automation. So support for agile and extreme development methodologies, as we discussed already. So we cannot have 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks dedicated for regression testing in agile environment. And in this case, having automation will definitely speed up the overall time to market. And automation is completely test case driven, so we need to have documented test cases before we start automation. So and important to have documented test cases in order to start automation. And we can also find defects missed by the manual test cases in some cases. Though it's not the goal of automation is not to find defects. Most commonly we use automation to ensure the things which are working before are still working. That's primarily regression testing. In some cases we also use automation for functional testing in agile environments, but it's very important to have detailed mock-ups and thorough design in order to automate the product even before it's ready for manual testing. And testing same application on multiple environments. So in current days there are just so many environments, so many browsers, so many operating systems, so many devices, and a lot of activity on mobile devices as well. And it's very important to ensure our application is accessible as expected and is functioning properly on all these devices. So in order to execute our tests on all the possible environments, it's nearly impossible to do that with manual efforts. So having automation in such cases will have a lot of impact on product cycles. So we covered most of the advantages already. We can highlight the most important advantages of automation. So as we discussed already, manual testing of all possible flows, testing each and every object on the page and covering all negative scenarios consumes a lot of manual effort, and having automation in such cases will save a lot of time. Since it does not need any manual intervention, you can actually run the automation scripts during nighttime as well. Like you can initiate the script execution before you leave for the day, and you can check the scripts, you can check the results in the morning. And we can also write some code to send automated emails once the execution is done, and you can also have some features where the script itself will take the failed test cases and runs the test cases multiple times. And we can also choose to log defects automatically in our defect tracking system if some test is failed multiple times. And automation definitely increase the test coverage, and whatever we cannot do through manual testing, or sometimes it takes a lot of manual effort without automation, and such things can be easily done with automation. Something like a lot of combinations. Let's say if you have an e-commerce application and you have to test each and every catalog item to ensure it's accessible and it's purchasable. And if you have thousands of items in your catalog, it's nearly impossible to test all those items manually. So having automation in such cases increases your test coverage a lot. And automation reduces the turnaround time of the testing. So if something takes 200 hours manually, and if you have two engineers, that takes 2.5 weeks, and if you have automation for that, it hardly takes 5 to 6 hours to execute the scripts. That means you are actually reducing your test cycle by more than 80%. So speed of the test execution will be increased, and the efficiency of the tests are also increased with the more reliability of test results through automation. And decreased cost and shorter time to market, and obviously all these activities result into quick time to market and increase the confidence of our customers, and finally reliability of test results. And what is test automation tool? So a tool is nothing but a package or installer, or can be simply a programming language, or a bunch of programs that allow us to simulate our manual tests, and which can be executed by the machine and give us the result back. So there are a lot of automation tools available in the market, and both open source and commercial. And most famous tool these days is Selenium. It is open source, and we also have Quick Test Pro by HP, which is licensed, and Rational Functional Tester is another important tool in the market. This is by IBM. And Silk Test by Borland. This tool used to have a lot of market earlier, and Test Complete is picking up. It supports both web and client server applications. And by the way, Selenium supports only web application automation. And Sahi is becoming famous these days. It has both open source version and a licensed version. It's similar to Selenium. And APM, Sickly, and Silk Mobile, these are mobile automation tools. APM is open source, and it was similar to Selenium, where you can identify objects based on a locator. And Sickly is another open source mobile automation tool, which is actually image based automation tool, and the execution is done based on the bitmaps. And Silk Mobile is again from Borland, and this is one of the advanced tools in test automation. I mean mobile test automation. This is a licensed tool. So we'll spend a few minutes understanding what is automation framework. Automation framework is a set of guidelines, standards, and tools designed to improve the productivity of automation engineers with better usability of the scripts. You might ask whether automation framework is necessary to perform automation. In fact, you can still do automation without any framework, but there will be a lot of redundancy in the work. You'll have to develop the same thing again and again. It will also have a lot of maintenance effort. In some cases, the maintenance effort is more than the actual effort it takes to automate the product. So if you have a strong framework which allows reusability, people with less technical skills can automate the product. So it increases the overall productivity of automation resources, and it speeds up the overall test automation process, and it will allow the manual testers who are involved in testing the product automate the tests. So if you take the automation process, usually the functional testers test the product before it's given for automation in most of the cases, and automation engineers understand the product and they try to execute the test couple of times before we start automation, and then they start automating the each and every test case. So there's a lot of rework here. So the functional testers already know the application, they know what tests are there and what tests are important and what tests need to be automated. So if we allow the functional testers to automate the product, we'll actually reduce a lot of effort, a lot of duplicate effort here. So having a strong framework, preferably a scriptless automation framework, will increase the test automation and will improve the productivity, reduce the maintenance effort. It will improve the stability of the test automation scripts and also the scalability of the scripts. When you develop a framework, you'll have to consider the future growth of the product. So you might have 100 test case now, and the test case count might grow to 2000 as we move forward. So you'll have to consider implementing features for a large scale application when you start the automation framework development initially. So framework also simplifies the maintenance effort as we discussed, and framework improves the reporting ability of automation scripts. So you can customize your test reports. You can include the screenshots where the script has failed. You can sometimes capture the videos also if required, and you can have step-by-step logs of the script execution. And in some cases also we can implement features like automatic failed case execution. So if you take any automation project, usually 5 to 6% of the scripts fail for random reasons. Most common reason being the sync up issues. So if you execute 1000 test cases, that means you have close to 50 to 60 failed tests in the first iteration, but only 1% of those failures are real failures of the application. So remaining are temporary failures. So you can implement a feature where the framework can pick up the failed test cases and can execute them automatically. In the second iteration, you have 30 failures instead of 50, and you can re-execute those 30 failures, and ultimately after 4 to 5 iterations you have 4 or 5 real failures of the application, and you can choose to log them as defects. So ultimately the goal of framework is to get better ROI on automation. So if you implement the right framework for your project, you can speed up the overall test automation effort, and you can reduce the maintenance, and you can increase the reusability, you can increase the number of iterations, and you get better ROI. So there are different types of automation frameworks for different needs of the project. We can choose the right framework suitable for us. So most common frameworks used in the industry are data driven, modular, keyword driven, and hybrid. And each framework has its own advantage. And let's say if you have the same set of tests that need to be executed with different data sets, as we discussed earlier, and if you have an e-commerce application where you have to test a catalog of items, you have to search for the item, you have to ensure you're able to add the item to cart, and you're able to purchase the item. And you have thousands of items and you want to test each of them, at least a bunch of them from different categories, to ensure they are visible to users all the time and they are searchable. So in such cases the test is going to be same, but you have to test the same thing with different data sets. So in such cases data driven is best suitable, and modular driven is approach where you write separate function for each and every test that you are going to automate. Sometimes you may also write some reusable functions and call them in each and every function. This is suitable if you have less number of test cases, maybe 50 to 60 test cases or less than 100 test cases, and investing a lot of time in advanced framework is not suitable in such cases. And if your application is pretty small, is going to be small going forward, and spending hundreds of hours on an advanced framework does not make much sense. So you can go for modular driven framework, and you can also use ready to use frameworks, something like TestNZ in case of Selenium, which is a modular driven framework. And keyword driven framework is little advanced, where you have reusable keywords and the test case execution is done using the keywords. For example, for any application we'll have a lot of common actions, something like you have to load a page, you have to navigate to a specific URL, and you have to click on a link or a button, you have to enter some values in a text field, you'll have to select a value from a drop down, and you have to verify something. And all these are pretty common actions that we perform on any given web-based application. So we can convert all these actions into keywords, and we just develop a spreadsheet with a list of steps and using different keywords for each step, ultimately which simulates our test case Identifying these common keywords and developing them into reusable keywords is very important. And usually keyword driven is suitable for large applications, and keyword driven reduce the duplicate effort on developing the same code again and again. It increases the reusability and it reduces the maintenance effort considerably. And hybrid framework is a combination of any given two frameworks. You can probably mix up data driven and keyword driven, or data driven plus modular for your application based on your needs. And if you have an application with a combination of tests, in some case you may have to do data driven tests, and in some case you may have some large complex tests where you have to use common keywords. So you can mix up the features and develop a hybrid framework. And there are also some ready to use frameworks available in the market. In case of Selenium, we have TestNG that's already addressed. You can use JUnit or NUnit in some cases. And you can also use Robot Framework, which is again ready to use framework, which is built on keyword driven approach. And there are few frameworks like FitnessAI, which is actually used for acceptance tests. And we have Cucumber, which is actually used for behavioral driven approach projects. We'll discuss more about these frameworks as we move forward. So that's all for now. We'll have more videos coming up on different topics. Please visit our YouTube channel for more short videos on Selenium introduction, a little more introduction on frameworks, and some hands-on sessions on these frameworks, and tool specific challenges that we have, especially on Selenium and mobile automation. Also, please visit our blogs, automationmentor.blogspot.in, for more topics on these areas. Thank you.